Directors of Public Health in the UK are either in the NHS or local government or some similar body, but we all share one set of overarching legal duties. Our first duty is to protect and promote the health of the population for which we are charged. So I have 1.2 million taxpayers who pay my salary, and I'm very grateful to them. The second is to arrive at decisions which are reasonable and in a reasonable manner. That's set in English law. In fact, it's set in most United Kingdom law. And the third is what I call the 4E's duty: economy, effectiveness, efficiency, and equity. And those are overarching duties wherever we are. We're not independent of the organisations that employ us, despite the fact that some of my colleagues may wish to be. And what I say today is in the context of reading and reviewing the literatures, and it's a bit provisional. Public health directors have no preeminence of knowledge in this debate. We are a bit like jacks of all trades, even though we may have some expertise in particular areas. And it's difficult to make decisions that are reasonable and arrived at reasonably when the science is so at variance. It seems to me there is an awful lot of bad science done. Ooh, we found formaldehyde in an e-cigarette. You know, you're sitting in a building where the concentrations are 10 times as high because it was built in the 70s. A lot of bad science which is done. And it seems to me that there is a hermeneutic of suspicion from some researchers towards e-cigarettes because they just don't like them because they think or are afraid they will renormalise. And if you're not going to do science in a way that is transparent and honest about your preconceptions, how on earth are people able to make decisions about policy? You know, I have to pay tribute to people like Liz Fisher, my head of tobacco control, and Louise Ross, who's here today, and Clive Bates, who have informed my thinking as much as Robert West and Linda and Martin and others on this issue. And I know that directors of public health are really quite divided on this. But actually, we're supposed to be an evidence-based profession. So let's put aside our misconceptions and start with the evidence. We have some ambitions in Hertfordshire for smoking, which is to continue to reduce the death, disease, disability and misery caused by tobacco. I won't go into that in detail. But I have some fundamental first principles. E-cigarette users who are taxpayers have a right to respect the same level of service from me about being unbiased and doing my duty as any other citizen. That is non-negotiable. The end game for tobacco is what I want, absolutely. I'd like to denormalise tobacco. I haven't seen a single shred of evidence, and I was pleased to hear Linda say that e-cigarettes renormalise. It feels to me that that's a sort of set of scientific bogeyman stuff. And it also feels that the stuff around formaldehyde and particulates. You know, we seem to want evidence that e-cigarettes are zero risk before we work with them, but how many of us fly on holiday? How many of us take a bus? You know, life is not zero risk. We don't have randomised controlled trials for bridges, but on the whole, they stay up. Certainly if you're in this country. So if we can't, we should avoid doing harm. But actually, if we can't make a thing completely safe, at least reduce harm as much as possible. We learned that with Safer Sex. We have more data on e-cigarettes than we had on HIV and the condom in the 1980s. We are in a fortunate position scientifically to come to some conclusions, it seems to me. So do we take a hermeneutic of suspicion? Or do we take a hermeneutic of generosity in a rapidly changing scientific world? And I believe I need to take the latter. Otherwise, I can't do my job and serve the people who pay my wages. Local problems are that we're not just in a context where the systems are changing, but, you know, tobacco, smoking cessation footfall for traditional services is going through the floor. The bottom is falling out of it. We've got a wholesale set of demographic change, a confused landscape, a reduction of 40% in our funding over the next 3 years in local government, and a whole range of social trends. We can either sit there preserving the services we've got, or we can meet that challenge and address that. I believe we have to do the latter. So where do I look for authority? Where do I look for authoritative science? I have to read that from a variety of sources. And I think if people start traducing or becoming hysterical about an issue, it reduces, in my mind, their command on my attention and on whether I should listen to them. So the careful, painstaking work commissioned by Public Health England and others, who have a legal authority to do what they do, convinces me far more than the increasingly shrill comments from some public health agencies and bodies who are not set up to scientifically mark the homework of other scientists. It is not the job of the Faculty of Public Health, fellow with it though I may be, to mark the scientific homework of people who are better informed, better engaged, and have far more of a tradition of research in this than we, frankly. And we need to have a bit of humility in this debate. So our reading of the context is that Hertfordshire will follow the lead of Leicestershire and become as e-cigarette friendly as we are able to be. Informed by vapers, for whom I am immensely grateful for their advice, in the recognition that the public health gains from e-cigarettes significantly outweigh the risks, significantly, and that the settled body of scientific evidence is heading in that direction. You can disagree with me if you like, but that's my mind made up. Sorry, till the science goes somewhere else, I've made my mind up. There is a fundamental demographic shift in smoking behaviour. I am responsible for good stewardship of the public purse. I have a budget of 50 million. Every penny of that is taxpayers' money in Hertfordshire. And I want to make sure that the taxpayer gets the very best. When 64% of smoking use and tobacco use in England is still by people with mental health problems, the e-cigarette presents an opportunity that I am not willing to pass up. And I don't think legally or morally I can pass that up either. Some local authorities are challenging their directors of public health on their continuing smoking spend against footfall. I think directors of public health need to get out of feeling afraid and into feeling that this gives us an opportunity. And actually, if someone gives up smoking with an e-cigarette without ever using my services, should we not see that as a victory for them and for us? And a victory for the public purse and the common good? I do. So we seem to have become obsessed now about nicotine addiction. I don't know if everybody has been reading Agatha Christie, where somebody kills a vicar using nicotine on the roses, but at a time when people are still dying from tobacco-related illness, surely the priority is to stop death, disability and misery from tobacco, not get obsessed with nicotine when the evidence is still building. We know nicotine has harms for some, but not for others. Actually, shouldn't we just stop people dying first and then work out what else goes wrong? Is that not a suitable, or have we learned nothing from safer sex, drugs and alcohol? So how do we stay on course in paradigm shift? I'm going to try and finish here to leave some time for questions. Which authority do I listen to? I think I've made that clear. The fiscal challenges. I think there are a few pointers on real-world issues. It's a moving field and evidence is changing. So we have to look at different types of evidence and on emerging practice. What good looks like today will be different from what good looks like in 5 years' time. If I'm not able to look at that and make sense of that for my population, I'm not worth my job. And I'm not planning on collecting my P45 anytime soon. We need to learn from others. There are issues about safety and confidence. It is to my deep regret that we were unable to have our Trading Standards Department accredit and licence as one of our good retailers in Hertfordshire an e-cigarette vendor because of the uncertainty about insurance and a number of other things. And I want to try and find a way around that because consumers need to have confidence. And my deep worry about the tobacco directive is that those careful e-cigarette retailers, who in my mind are as much public health advocates as some of the rest of us, have done us a service and may well not be able to do the work that they are doing, and therefore people will have no guidance in a market that is immensely confusing. I do find it strange that we talk about renormalisation of tobacco in a world, quite frankly, where the devices most people are using look more like Doctor Who's sonic screwdriver than anything like Benson and Hedges. But there we are. I just find that as a psychologist immensely curious. But the citizen, focusing on the citizen, if e-cigarettes are here to stay, we must do something to enable citizens to have confidence in the products they buy. That is a public health aspiration, and it will help me achieve my goals. I'm not going to say any more because I'd like to leave time for at least one question. Thank you for listening.
Very refreshing, having been on the receiving end of some personal attacks recently. It's refreshing to hear your perspective, so thank you very much. We have got time for some questions for Jim. Robert.
Thanks very much. Robert West from University College London, obviously.
It's quite scary being asked a question about some of these papers.
Some of you know I'm a big fan of Bayes' theorem, and in Bayesian analysis, essentially you never come to firm conclusions. You never close your mind to anything. Essentially, what you do is you adjust your confidence and strength of belief. So I was a little perturbed to say that, to hear you say, that some issues are closed for you, because I think we do need to consider always, the possibility that we might be wrong, and continue to collect data. So it's a point. You can respond to the point or the sort of question.
I wouldn't disagree with you. I just think in policy terms there comes a point where we have to say, right, we know enough to move on, and if it changes, we'll move back. That's all I was. Because you can't just sit there dithering while people die.
Any other questions? Have you spotted a hand?
Oh, that gentleman there.
Yeah.
Tim Phillips from eSig Intelligence. You mentioned that your mind's made up on the policy, but that some of your colleagues in other areas of public health are not of the same opinion. How do you discuss these issues? How is this coming to light, and will it change?
With great fidelity. It feels like the Church of England debating homosexuality. It really does. I've had more open discussions in the Vatican, I have to say. It causes people a great deal of pain, because there are some directors of public health who genuinely and sincerely hold the views that we mustn't act on e-cigarettes until we know much more, and they genuinely believe that, and that's fine. And actually, when you come from a position of sincerity, it is much greater. It's much easier to debate with respect. And I think it is there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the precautionary principle at work here. There really is. I think there is a need for us to refocus on our duties and obligations. It probably shows my first degrees theology and philosophy, but it's like, go back to the sources of authority, go back to first principles and start from there. And we're not doing that. People are frightened, and people are also scared of being sued. I think it also depends on the profession. I'm a psychologist, not a medic by background, so I approach things in a different way, and I'm much more comfortable with a variety of different sources of evidence. The kind of gold standard hegemony of the systematic review is not something that you could actually... Well, you wouldn't have any local government services if you had to have systematic reviews for everything. Certainly wouldn't have most social work. So it is that... But the hostility and the heat and the anger, that you've experienced, for example, which I think is utterly unacceptable in behavioural terms, it should be taken out of it. And I think that comes from the fact that there are so many stakes in this. People fear that 40 years of their work will be undone. And when people come from a position of fear, then things get entrenched in my experience. We're opposite the Athenaeum, so Aesculapius, my favourite Greek philosopher, once said, the mind of a bigot is like the pupil of an eye. It closes when you shine light on it. So all the data in the world will not change people who are frozen in fear because they don't want to hurt other human beings. And we need to find a way around that, a careful, ongoing dialogue. But the consensus statement, I think, was a great move forward for us. And so the Association of Directors of Public Health signed, of which I'm the membership secretary, signed that consensus statement. I think that was very helpful. Does that answer?
Great.
Sorry.